Imagine living for almost 1,000 years, witnessing the birth of 9 generations of your family, speaking personally with Adam about what the Garden of Eden was like, watching your father being taken up to the heavens without experiencing death, seeing your grandson build a massive ship in the middle of a land without oceans. This is not a science fiction story. It is the extraordinary life of Methuselah, the man who, according to the sacred scriptures, lived for 969 years. In a world vastly different from ours, where the atmosphere was richer in oxygen, a mysterious vapor canopy enveloped the earth, and humans lived for centuries, Methuselah stood out not only for his unprecedented longevity, but also for being the vital link between the creation of the world and its first great cataclysm, the flood. His story transports us to a lost era where giants walked the earth, where ancient technology rivaled the modern, and where a man could accumulate wisdom for nearly a millennium. To understand the extraordinary story of Methuselah, we need to go back to the very beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. As Genesis 1:1 tells us, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The world into which Methuselah was born was drastically different from the one we know today. It was a land where men lived for hundreds of years, where the connection with the Creator was closer, and where the memories of the Garden of Eden were still alive in the stories told by the first humans. After creation and the fall of man, generations began to multiply upon the earth. In Genesis 5, we find the genealogy that leads us to Methuselah. It all begins with Adam, who lived 130 years and begot Seth. Seth, in turn, lived 105 years and begot Enosh. Then Enosh lived 90 years and begot Canaan. Canaan lived 70 years and begot Mahalalel. Mahalalel lived 65 years and begot Jared. Jared lived 162 years and begot Enoch, who would become the father of Methuselah. The story of Methuselah properly begins with his father, Enoch. In Genesis 5:21, the Bible tells us that Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. Enoch was an extraordinary man, known for his unique intimacy with God. In fact, in Genesis 5:22, we read that Enoch walked with God for 300 years after he begot Methuselah. This special walk with God would be a fundamental influence on his son's life. Methuselah's birth occurred at a unique moment in human history. Adam, the first man created by God, was still alive. Imagine the depth of conversations and teachings Methuselah could have received from someone who had walked in the Garden of Eden and spoken directly with God. In Genesis 5:3-5, we learn that Adam lived a total of 930 years, meaning Methuselah had approximately 243 years of coexistence with him, more than enough time to learn much about the origins of humanity and the nature of God. During these early centuries, Methuselah grew up in a divided world. On one side were the descendants of Seth, the lineage faithful to God, to which he belonged. In Genesis 4:26, we read that in Seth's time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. This lineage kept true worship of God alive and preserved his divine promises. On the other side were the descendants of Cain, who strayed from the ways of the Lord. In Genesis 4:16-22, we see that while the Cainites developed impressive skills, such as metallurgy and music, they also became morally corrupt and increasingly distant from God. Methuselah's very name carried a deep prophetic meaning. In Hebrew, Methuselah can be interpreted in various ways, but a common interpretation is, "his death shall bring," which many scholars connect to the fact that the flood came in the same year as his death. This interpretation gains even more significance when we observe in Genesis 5:27 that all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. The year of his death coincided exactly with the beginning of the flood, thus fulfilling the prophetic meaning of his name. The environment in which Methuselah grew up was unique. His father, Enoch, was a man who walked so closely with God that, as Genesis 5:24 tells us, Enoch walked with God and he was no more, because God took him. This extraordinary event, which happened when Methuselah was 300 years old, must have had a profound impact on his spiritual life. Imagine witnessing your own father being taken up to heaven without experiencing death. This experience surely strengthened his faith and understanding of God's power and reality. The antediluvian world was physically very different from ours. In Genesis 1:7, we read that God made a separation between the waters that were under the firmament and the waters that were above the firmament. Many scholars suggest that there was a water vapor canopy around the earth, creating very different climatic conditions from today. This vapor layer may have filtered harmful radiation and contributed to a more uniform and pleasant climate across the planet, possibly being one of the factors that allowed for the extraordinary longevity of the patriarchs. During his early years, Methuselah was instructed in his family's traditions and in the ways of God. He grew up hearing the stories of creation, learning how God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, as told in Genesis 2:7. He also learned about the fall of man and the first promise of redemption. In Genesis 3:15, God promised that the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, a prophecy about the future Messiah that was carefully preserved and passed down through the generations. Young Methuselah also witnessed the consequences of sin spreading throughout the world. In Genesis 6:5, we read that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Violence was increasing, and society was becoming more and more corrupt. However, amid this moral degradation, Methuselah's family remained a beacon of light, preserving true worship of God. As he grew, Methuselah must have recognized the contrast between the two lineages developing on the earth. The descendants of Cain built cities, developed technologies, and created an impressive but spiritually empty civilization. Meanwhile, the lineage of Seth, though possibly less technologically advanced, preserved something far more precious: the knowledge and worship of the true God. The early centuries of Methuselah's life were fundamental in shaping the character that would allow him to remain faithful to God for nearly 1,000 years. He had the privilege of learning from Adam about creation and the fall, of being raised by a father who walked intimately with God, and of being part of a lineage that preserved true faith amid a rapidly corrupting world. This solid spiritual foundation would be crucial for the events to come, as Methuselah was destined to be a vital link in the chain of generations leading to Noah, the man whom God would choose to preserve life on earth during the flood. As Methuselah grew, his life was profoundly influenced by the teachings of his father, Enoch, and by the still-living presence of Adam in the community. In Genesis 5:22, the Bible reveals something extraordinary about his father. Enoch walked with God for 300 years after he fathered Methuselah. This special relationship between Enoch and God would fundamentally shape the spiritual formation of young Methuselah. During his first 100 years, still considered youth at that time, Methuselah had the unique privilege of coexisting with multiple generations of patriarchs. In Genesis 5, we can trace the generations that were still alive when he was young: Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, and his father, Enoch. Each of these men carried precious memories and teachings about God and his promises. One of the most significant moments in his youth occurred in Genesis 5:24, when something unprecedented happened to his father. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more because God took him. This extraordinary event took place when Methuselah was 300 years old. Imagine the impact of seeing his own father taken up to heaven without experiencing death. This unique occurrence undoubtedly deepened his understanding of God's power and reality. Methuselah's upbringing included not only spiritual knowledge, but also an understanding of the promise God had made in Genesis 3:15, where the Lord said to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This promise of a future Redeemer was central to the faith of Seth's lineage. As he grew, Methuselah witnessed changes in the world around him. In Genesis 6:1, we read that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the world was rapidly becoming populated, and with that, new challenges arose in maintaining the purity of faith. At the age of 187, as stated in Genesis 5:25, Methuselah lived 187 years and fathered Lamech. This was a crucial moment in his life, as he now became a father and bore the responsibility of passing down the spiritual legacy he had received to the next generation. The world in which Methuselah lived was changing rapidly. Cain's descendants had developed impressive cities and technologies. In Genesis 4:20-22, we see that they had become livestock breeders, skilled musicians, and craftsmen in bronze and iron. However, along with this material development came increasing moral corruption. During this period, Methuselah had to navigate between two distinct worlds. On one hand, there was the technologically advanced civilization of the Cainites, who had strayed from God. On the other hand, there was the community of the Sethites, who kept the worship of the Lord alive. In Genesis 6:2, we begin to see the consequences of this division when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Methuselah's responsibility as a guardian of the true faith grew as the older patriarchs passed away. In Genesis 5:5, we read that all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. With Adam's death, Methuselah became one of the primary keepers of the stories of creation and God's promises. The birth of his son, Lamech, brought new responsibilities and challenges. As a father, Methuselah had to not only live out his faith, but also pass it down to the next generation. In a world that was becoming increasingly corrupt, this task became both more difficult and more crucial. The contrast between the two lineages was becoming more evident. While Cain's descendants prospered materially, the followers of the true God, like Methuselah and his family, focused on preserving something far more valuable: the knowledge and worship of the Lord. In Genesis 6:5, we see the result of this divergence. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. As Methuselah aged, his wisdom and experience became increasingly valuable to his community. He had personally witnessed great events in human history: the death of Adam, the rapture of his father Enoch, and the dramatic transformations occurring in the world. All this knowledge and experience would be crucial in guiding future generations. Methuselah's life during this period was marked by an interesting duality. On one hand, he was a man of great longevity and wisdom, respected in his community. On the other, he was still at the beginning of his journey, as he would live for hundreds more years and witness even more extraordinary events. As Methuselah watched his son Lamech grow, he continued to pass down the teachings he had received. The importance of this transmission of knowledge would become even clearer in the generations to come, for through Lamech would come Noah, the man God would choose to preserve life during the impending flood. As the centuries passed, Methuselah established himself as a central figure in his community. After the rapture of his father, Enoch, who, as we see in Genesis 5:24, walked with God and he was no more because God took him, Methuselah emerged as the primary guardian of divine traditions and teachings within his lineage. The world continued to change rapidly. In Genesis 6:1-2, the Bible reveals that When men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all whom they chose. This intermingling between the godly and the ungodly lineages brought severe consequences for society. Methuselah observed these changes with growing concern. In Genesis 6:5, we find a grim description of those times. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. As a patriarch, Methuselah bore the responsibility of keeping his family faithful to God's ways amid widespread corruption. The birth of his grandson Noah was a particularly significant moment. In Genesis 5:28-29, we read that Lamech lived 182 years and had a son. He named him Noah and said, "He will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground that the Lord has cursed." The name Noah, meaning rest or comfort, carried a prophecy about the special role this child would play in the future. During these years, Methuselah witnessed a growing degradation of society. In Genesis 6:11, the Bible tells us that the earth was corrupt before God and full of violence. As one of the few remaining who still upheld true faith, Methuselah had the crucial mission of passing down divine teachings to his son Lamech and his grandson Noah. Methuselah's extraordinary longevity, which, as seen in Genesis 5:27, reached 969 years, granted him a unique perspective on human history. He had personally witnessed the great changes that had taken place from the time of Adam to his own era, and could share this knowledge with younger generations. The antediluvian world had become a very different place from the one Methuselah had known in his youth. Technology and the arts had developed significantly, as seen in Genesis 4:21-22, where Cain's descendants are described as inventors of musical instruments and craftsmen in bronze and iron. However, this material progress was not accompanied by corresponding spiritual development. As his grandson Noah grew, Methuselah must have noticed special qualities in him. In Genesis 6:9, the Bible describes Noah as a righteous man, blameless among his contemporaries. Noah walked with God. This description strongly resembles that of Enoch, Methuselah's father, showing how true faith had been preserved across generations despite the corruption around them. Society continued to deteriorate. In Genesis 6:6, we read that the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. Violence and wickedness had reached unprecedented levels. In Genesis 6:13, God declares, "The end of all flesh has come before me, because the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." During this period, Methuselah remained a figure of stability and wisdom in his community. His presence served as a living reminder of humanity's origins and God's promises. He had personally known Adam and could first-hand share the stories of creation and the fall. His experience was invaluable in keeping the memory of God's acts and promises alive. Methuselah's role as a patriarch became even more crucial when his grandson Noah began to receive divine revelations. In Genesis 6:13-14, God speaks to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, because the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood." The wisdom Methuselah had accumulated over his many centuries of life must have been a fundamental support for Noah during the years of preparation for the flood. Although the Bible does not explicitly mention it, we can imagine the conversations between grandfather and grandson about the ancient times, about what the world was like when it was still closer to its creation, and about the importance of remaining faithful to God even when the entire world around them had become corrupt. The contrast between Methuselah's family and the rest of society became increasingly stark. In Genesis 6:12, we read that God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. Yet, amid this widespread corruption, Methuselah, his son Lamech, and his grandson Noah remained faithful to the Lord's ways. Methuselah's later years were marked by a unique combination of accumulated wisdom and growing challenges. He had to balance his role as a guardian of ancient traditions with the need to prepare the younger generations for the dramatic changes that were coming. His extraordinary longevity made him a living bridge between the world as God had created it and the world that was about to face divine judgment through the flood. As Methuselah approached his final years, extraordinary events began to unfold. His grandson Noah, now a mature man, received specific instructions from God about an impending catastrophe. In Genesis 6:15-16, the Lord provided detailed guidelines. "This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks." As a man who had lived for so long and witnessed countless changes, Methuselah understood the gravity of the situation. In Genesis 6:17, God revealed his plan to Noah. "And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die." During this time, Methuselah witnessed the beginning of the ark's construction, a project that would take many decades. In Genesis 6:18-20, God established his covenant with Noah, saying, "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive. With you they shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every sort will come to you, to keep them alive." The world around them continued in its downward spiral of moral decay. In Genesis 6:3, the Lord set a limit. "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. This period of grace was given so that humanity would have the opportunity to repent. As the ark was being built, Methuselah observed how his grandson faced scorn and disbelief from the people. In 2 Peter 2:5, Noah is referred to as a preacher of righteousness, indicating that he was not only constructing the ark, but also warning people about the coming judgment. As the patriarch and the oldest living man on earth, Methuselah's presence likely lent credibility to Noah's warnings. The preparation for the flood was not just a matter of construction. In Genesis 6:21, God instructed Noah on the necessary provisions. "And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them." The magnitude of this task, storing and preparing food, was enormous, and we can imagine how Methuselah's experience proved invaluable in the process. Hebrews 11:7 offers an additional perspective on this period. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household. Noah's faith was shared by his family, including his grandfather Methuselah, who witnessed the fulfillment of prophecy unfolding before his very eyes. The design of the ark was revolutionary for its time. In Genesis 6:14, God specified, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch." This massive construction was a visible testimony to all who passed by, a final warning of the judgment to come. The society of that time had become exceedingly violent. In 2 Peter 3:6, it is mentioned that, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. Corruption had reached unprecedented levels, yet even in His mercy, God gave people time to repent. In Matthew 24:37-39, Jesus referenced this period. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. This description gives us insight into how people continued living their lives normally, ignoring the warnings. During these years, Methuselah remained a living testimony to God's faithfulness. He had seen the world change drastically, from his early days when he could still converse with Adam to the present moment where humanity stood on the brink of destruction. His presence served as a constant reminder of God's patience and long-suffering. In 1 Peter 3:20, it is mentioned that God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. This divine patience extended for decades, giving people ample opportunity to recognize their mistakes and turn to God. The construction of the ark was not just an engineering project, but also an act of faith and obedience. In Genesis 7:5 we read, "And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him." This obedience was a powerful testimony to the entire family, including Methuselah, who witnessed his grandson faithfully following God's instructions. As the ark's completion neared, tensions must have been rising. Soon, the animals would begin arriving, just as God had promised. In his final days, Methuselah watched as the signs of divine judgment became increasingly evident. His extraordinarily long life was drawing to an end, just as his very name had foretold. The flood would come upon his death. The last days of Methuselah coincided with the most crucial moment in ancient human history. In Genesis 7:1, God finally gave Noah the final command. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole household, because I have found you righteous in this generation." This moment marked the end of an era and the fulfillment of the prophetic meaning behind Methuselah's name. Methuselah's significance in the history of redemption is evident in Luke 3:23-38, where his presence in the genealogy of Jesus Christ is recorded. This sacred lineage, stretching from Adam to Jesus, highlights how Methuselah served as a vital link in the transmission of the messianic promise. The impact of Methuselah's life extended far beyond his own time. In Job 8:8-10, we find a reflection on the wisdom of past generations. Ask the former generations and find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday and know nothing, and our days on earth are but a shadow. Will they not instruct you and tell you? Will they not bring forth words from their understanding? Jewish tradition, as recorded in the Talmud, suggests that Methuselah died 7 days before the onset of the flood. In Genesis 7:4, God declares, "For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made." This 7-day period may have been a time of mourning for the death of the last antediluvian patriarch. Genesis 7:6-7 continues the narrative. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. This moment marks the final transition between the ancient world that Methuselah had known and the new world that would emerge after the flood. Methuselah's testimony to God's faithfulness echoes in Psalm 91:2. "Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting. You are God. His extraordinarily long life stood as a living testimony to this eternal truth. Ecclesiastes 7:13-14 offers a reflection that applies to Methuselah's life. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made the one as well as the other. Throughout his long life, Methuselah witnessed both God's goodness and his judgment. Methuselah's life serves as a powerful example of divine patience. In 2 Peter 3:9 we read, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." His extraordinary longevity reflected this divine patience. Methuselah's role as a preserver of divine knowledge is reflected in Deuteronomy 32:7. "Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, and they will explain to you." He was, quite literally, a living link to the days of creation. Proverbs 13:22 states that a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. Methuselah's spiritual legacy extended not only through Noah, but continued to influence generations through the stories preserved in Scripture. The intergenerational faithfulness demonstrated in Methuselah's life is echoed in Psalm 145:4. "One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts." His life was a living example of this transmission of knowledge and faith through generations. In Isaiah 46:9, God declares, "Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other." Methuselah served as a living witness to these former things, having personally experienced much of ancient human history. The importance of preserving and passing down divine truth, exemplified in Methuselah's life, is echoed in Psalm 78:3-4. "Things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done." In Acts 17:26-27, we find a perspective on God's purpose for human generations. "From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history, and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him." Methuselah's life served this divine purpose, bearing witness to God's reality and faithfulness for multiple generations. The impact of Methuselah's life continues to resonate through the centuries. In Hebrews 12:1, we are reminded that we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Methuselah undoubtedly holds a special place in this cloud of witnesses, having lived longer than any recorded human and serving as a vital bridge between Adam and Noah. His life teaches us timeless lessons about faithfulness, perseverance, and the importance of passing down divine truth across generations. In 1 Corinthians 10:11, we are reminded, "These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us." Methuselah's example remains relevant today, reminding us of the importance of remaining faithful to God, even when the world around us drifts away from him. We have reached the end of this extraordinary journey through the life of the longest living man in biblical history. The story of Methuselah teaches us valuable lessons about faith, perseverance, and the importance of passing down divine values through generations. If you were amazed by this incredible narrative and want to discover more fascinating stories from the Bible, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell to stay updated on upcoming videos. Did you know that sharing knowledge is a way to bless others? So, if this video touched your heart, share it with your friends and family. Who knows? Someone close to you might also be inspired by this powerful story. Let us know in the comments which part of Methuselah's story stood out to you the most. Your participation is very important to us. See you in the next video, where we will continue exploring the wonderful stories of God's Word. May the Lord bless you and your family.